99% of my listeners watch without subscribing. Please press the subscribe button and leave a like on the video, my dear listeners. It will help the channel grow during these difficult times. The morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass of my executive office on the 32nd floor as I scrolled through the final interview list for today's Chief Strategy Officer position. At the very top of the schedule, highlighted in yellow by my assistant, was a name that made me set my coffee down very slowly. Natalie Cole. My older sister. The same Natalie who, exactly 4 hours earlier, had stood in our parents' kitchen and delivered what she believed was the final, decisive blow to my already battered reputation. I'm Adriana Cole. Although Natalie had taken to calling me the family disappointment for the past 6 years, I had stopped flinching at it long ago. At 32, I was the younger sister who had walked away from her PhD program at MIT, broken our parents' hearts, and apparently squandered every ounce of her potential on tiny side projects no one in the family understood or respected. What they didn't know was that those tiny side projects had grown into Helix Innovations, an AI-driven biotech company valued at $5.4 billion. What they didn't know was that the modest townhouse I lived in was on a street I quietly owned 3 buildings on. What they didn't know was that the family disappointment had become one of the youngest female CEOs in the Fortune 500, and that the medication their father took every morning had been developed by a team that reported to me. And in exactly 26 minutes, Natalie was going to walk into my boardroom for the most important interview of her life, completely unaware that her future rested in the hands of the sister she had spent years belittling. My phone buzzed with a message from Daniel Reyes, my Chief Operating Officer. Cole interview moved to boardroom 7 per your request. Full panel assembled. This should be interesting. Daniel was one of the only people who knew the full story of my family. He had watched me build Helix from a borrowed lab in a converted garage to a global biotech leader, while my own family stayed completely oblivious. He had also seen the look in my eyes every time I came back from a family dinner where I was treated like the broken child who couldn't get her life together. I opened Natalie's resume on my tablet. Impressive, I had to admit. MBA from Stanford, 3 years at Goldman Sachs, 2 years at Bain & Company on the healthcare practice. She had built a textbook elite career while constantly reminding everyone within earshot that she wasn't anything like her irresponsible little sister. Every family gathering for the last 6 years had featured Natalie's careful, calibrated jabs about my choices, my apartment, my supposed lack of ambition. The irony was almost too neat. Helix Innovations was the company every strategic operator in life sciences wanted into. We had rewritten the rules of drug discovery using AI-driven molecular simulation, brought 3 personalized medicine platforms to market in under 4 years, and offered compensation packages that made big pharma look like community college stipends. Natalie had been quietly trying to get an interview with us for 9 months. I leaned back in my chair and let myself remember that morning's confrontation in our mother's kitchen. I had stopped by early to drop off a birthday gift for our father, a vintage Leica IIF rangefinder camera in immaculate condition. Dad had used a Leica during his army years and had mentioned the model maybe twice in his life. I had spent 11 months tracking this exact unit down through a dealer in Munich. I had wrapped it in plain paper and let everyone assume it was something I had picked up at a flea market. "What are you doing here so early?" Natalie had asked, looking flawless in a charcoal interview suit. "Don't you have a tutoring class to go teach or something?" The tutoring class. That was Natalie's latest theory about my income. She had noticed that I spent a lot of time at coffee shops with my laptop and clusters of younger people, and concluded that I must be running some kind of small online tutoring business. The idea that those young people were my engineers, that those coffee shop sessions were product reviews, that I was raising another round of growth capital between cappuccinos, had never crossed her mind. "Just dropping off Dad's gift," I said, setting the wrapped box on the counter. "Right. Well, I'd appreciate it if you didn't hang around. I have the most important interview of my life today, and the last thing I need is any kind of distraction." "Distraction," I had repeated. Natalie turned to face me fully, her expression cold and pre-rehearsed. "Adriana, you're an embarrassment to our last name. You're 32 years old. You have no real career, no savings, no track record, no plan. The very last thing I need is for anyone in my industry to find out we're related." Mom had tried to step in. "Natalie, that's harsh." "No, Mom. It needs to be said. We've all been tiptoeing around this for years. Adriana dropped out of MIT, has been bouncing between freelance projects and side hustles, and lives like a graduate student. Today I'm interviewing with Helix Innovations, the most important biotech company in the country. I cannot afford to have my career derailed by association with someone who represents the exact opposite of what they want in a senior executive." She had stepped closer, her voice dropping to a precise, surgical hiss. "So please, for once in your life, stay away from successful people. Don't embarrass this family any more than you already have." I had simply nodded, picked up my keys, and walked out, saying nothing about the fact that in 3 hours she would be sitting across from me in a glass-walled conference room, hoping I would hand her the career she had spent her entire adult life chasing. Now, sitting in my executive chair with the city skyline behind me, I opened the folder containing Natalie's full application package. Her cover letter was particularly entertaining. Helix Innovations represents everything I aspire to in my career: scientific rigor, operational excellence, and the courage to redefine an industry. I have devoted my professional life to reaching this moment, and I believe my unique combination of strategic discipline and execution makes me the ideal candidate for your Chief Strategy Officer position. She had no idea how right she was about this being her ideal position. She also had no idea that her disappointment of a sister had personally requested to be placed on this interview panel the moment HR flagged her application 2 months ago. My assistant, Maya, knocked softly. "Ms. Cole, the interview panel is assembled." Ms. Cole, the candidate, arrives in 15 minutes. "Good. Has everyone reviewed her background?" "They have." Maya paused, a small smile touching the corner of her mouth. "The team is very curious about your decision to personally lead this interview." I stood and smoothed my charcoal suit. "Well, it's important to vet potential family members carefully." "Family members?" "Future corporate family," I clarified, although Maya's knowing look suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Boardroom 7 was our most impressive interview space: panoramic skyline views, a polished walnut conference table that could seat 20, and 4 wall-mounted displays cycling real-time data from our active drug discovery pipeline. The numbers alone, simulation accuracy, trial enrollment metrics, partnership revenue, were enough to make any strategy professional in the country lose composure. My panel was already in their seats. Daniel Reyes, RCO. Sarah Lynn, our current Chief Strategy Officer, who would be transitioning to a senior advisory role in 2 months. David Park, our Head of Strategic Partnerships and the executive who had personally negotiated 4 of our largest pharma alliances. "Remind me again," Sarah said, glancing up from her tablet, "why exactly you're conducting this interview personally?" "We've hired 6 strategy directors without you ever sitting in the room." "Special circumstances," I replied. "Trust me, this one needs a personal touch." At exactly 2 o'clock, Maya's voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Cole has arrived. Send her in." I turned my chair toward the window so my back was to the door, ostensibly absorbed in something on my tablet. My pulse ticked up slightly, not from nerves, but from anticipation. 6 years of being dismissed, mocked, lectured, and treated like a cautionary tale were about to fold neatly back on themselves. "Ms. Cole," Maya announced from the doorway. "Please come in. The panel is ready for you." I heard the confident, even rhythm of Natalie's heels as she walked into the room. Her voice, when she spoke, carried that perfectly modulated, executive presence she had spent years calibrating. "Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm Natalie Cole, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here at Helix Innovations." Sarah stood to greet her. "Welcome, Natalie. I'm Sarah Lynn, our outgoing Chief Strategy Officer. This is Daniel Reyes, our COO, and David Park, our Head of Strategic Partnerships." "Anne, our CEO wanted to lead this interview personally," Daniel said, with barely suppressed amusement. I swiveled the chair around slowly, allowing recognition to dawn at its own pace. The transformation was extraordinary. Natalie's polished smile froze, then cracked, then disappeared entirely. The color drained from her face the way water drains from a cracked glass, all at once and from everywhere. "Hello, Natalie," I said calmly, standing and extending a hand for a professional handshake. "Welcome to Helix Innovations. I'm Adriana Cole, Chief Executive Officer." The silence that followed was something I would remember for the rest of my life. Natalie's hand hung limp inside mine. Her mouth opened and closed without producing a single coherent sound. Her carefully rehearsed introduction dissolved into pure, electric shock. "Please have a seat," I continued, gesturing to the chair directly across from me. "We're excited to learn more about your background and qualifications." Natalie sank into the chair like her legs had stopped responding to commands. Her eyes flicked across the room, the wall displays cycling our pipeline metrics, the city skyline outside the window, the unmistakable signature of a serious operating company. She looked small in a way I had never seen her look before. I don't understand," she finally managed. "What don't you understand?" I asked pleasantly. "The interview process?" "I'd be happy to explain. We'll be discussing your experience, your perspective on strategy in life sciences, and how you might contribute to Helix's continued growth." Daniel stepped in smoothly, mercifully. "Natalie, your resume shows excellent experience at Goldman and at Bain's healthcare practice. Could you walk us through your most significant strategic engagements?" Natalie visibly fought to reassemble herself, her professional training wrestling with her personal shock. "Yes, of course. At Bain, I led the post-merger integration strategy for Westfield Holdings' acquisition of 2 regional pharmacy benefit managers. We delivered an internal rate of return of 28% in the first year, well above the deal model." "Impressive," Sarah noted. "What was your strategic framework?" As Natalie walked through her methodology, I watched her very carefully. Despite the shock, her professional capability was undeniable. She understood healthcare economics, she knew how to read a complex P&L, and she could speak crisply about deal architecture. Under different circumstances, she would have been exactly the kind of candidate we were looking for. But these were not different circumstances. "That's a solid traditional approach," I said when she finished. "But at Helix, we've moved past conventional strategy frameworks. David, would you bring up our Genesis pipeline metrics?" David activated the central display, revealing a live dashboard of our most ambitious current platform. Genesis uses AI-driven molecular simulation to compress drug discovery timelines from 6 years to 14 months. We're seeing simulation to clinical concordance rates of 87% and a per-molecule R&D cost reduction of 72%. Natalie's eyes widened as she absorbed the numbers. "Those metrics aren't realistic for the industry." "They're standard for us," I said quietly. "We don't do traditional life sciences strategy here. We do computational biology applied through advanced infrastructure. The question is, can you actually think beyond the frameworks you learned at Stanford and refined at Bain?" The challenge hung in the air. Natalie glanced around the table, finally registering that this interview had become about more than a job. This had become a question of whether she could throw away her entire professional worldview and rebuild it. I would need time to understand your proprietary systems in greater depth," she said carefully. "But yes, I believe I could learn this approach and contribute meaningfully." "Learn from whom?" I asked quietly. The implication of the question was clear. If she got this job, she would be learning from me. From the sister she had called an embarrassment that morning. From the family disappointment who had quietly built one of the most consequential companies in the country. Natalie met my eyes for the first time since recognizing me. From you, I suppose." "From me," I confirmed. "The MIT dropout. The family disappointment. The sister with no career, no savings, no track record, no plan." The other panel members exchanged careful glances, slowly piecing together the undercurrents of the conversation. Daniel cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should walk through the responsibilities of the role in more detail." "Actually," I said, standing, "I think we should take a brief recess. Natalie, would you mind stepping out for a moment? Maya can show you the executive lounge. There are some materials there that you might find interesting." She nodded mutely and left the room. The moment the door closed, Sarah turned to me with both eyebrows raised. Your sister. My sister, I confirmed. The one who told me 4 hours ago that I was an embarrassment to our family name and that I should stay away from successful people. David let out a low whistle. That's awkward. Is it? I pulled up a different folder, the one our research team had compiled during her application review. Look at her numbers. She's genuinely talented. Her strategy work is solid. Her execution is clean. Her results are real. But, Daniel prompted. But she spent 6 years treating me like a failure without ever bothering to ask what I actually do for a living. I walked to the window, looking down at the streets 40 floors below. She assumed the worst. She never questioned that assumption, even when the evidence in front of her suggested otherwise. What kind of evidence? Sarah asked. I smiled, very faintly. I pay for our father's cardiac medication. I covered the second mortgage on our parents' house when our father's bypass surgery wiped out their savings 2 years ago. I have been anonymously funding my niece Eliza's tuition at Lakeside Academy for 3 years. Natalie has benefited from my success, very directly, while simultaneously condemning me for not having any. The room went silent as the implications settled. So what's the play? Daniel asked. Hire her and make her work for the sister she insulted. That's a fairly serious workplace dynamics risk. Or, David offered, don't hire her. Let her spend the rest of her life wondering how different things might have been. I considered both options. Through the glass wall I could see Natalie in the executive lounge, standing in front of the awards display that showcased Helix's achievements over the last 5 years. She was reading each plaque slowly, methodically, as if trying to physically reconcile what she was seeing with what she had believed for the last 6 years. There's a third option, I said finally. We hire her. But not for the position she applied for. What do you mean? Sarah asked. I turned back to the group. She applied for Chief Strategy Officer, reporting to me. Instead, we offer her Chief of Staff to the CEO. Reporting directly to me. Daniel grinned. That's either brilliant or surgical. Probably both. But here is the thing. She's genuinely capable. And despite everything, she is still my sister. This could be an opportunity for both of us to actually learn something. Learn what? David asked. She could learn that success comes in shapes she doesn't recognize, and that judging people from across a kitchen counter is a dangerous habit. I could learn whether our relationship can survive the truth of who I really am. Sarah nodded slowly. And if it doesn't work, then at least we'll both know we tried. 20 minutes later, Natalie returned to the boardroom. Her composure had been rebuilt, but I could see the questions burning inside her head. Natalie, I began, after reviewing your qualifications and discussing your background with the team, we'd like to make you an offer. Her face brightened with hope and confusion at the same time. An offer. Not for the Chief Strategy Officer position you applied for. Her expression dropped slightly. Oh. We'd like to offer you the role of Chief of Staff to the CEO, with focus on cross-functional strategy execution and special projects. Reporting directly to me. Natalie blinked several times. That would be working directly for you. Yes. Every day. Every day. She looked around the table, then back at me. Can I ask why? I leaned forward, meeting her gaze directly. Because you're talented, Natalie. Your work at Goldman and Bain proves it. But you're also locked inside conventional thinking patterns that limit your ceiling. And you think working for you would expand it. I think working with me might teach you things you cannot learn anywhere else. About innovation. About questioning your own assumptions. About the difference between actual success and the appearance of success. The room fell silent again. Natalie's internal struggle was visible across her face. Professional ambition wrestling with personal pride. Opportunity colliding with the awkwardness of the situation. What would the compensation package look like? She asked finally. Daniel slid a folder across the table. It's all in there. I think you'll find it competitive. Natalie opened the folder, and her eyes widened. The salary alone was 45% above her Bain compensation, plus equity vesting over 4 years, comprehensive benefits, and a signing bonus that exceeded a year of her current rent. This is generous, she said carefully. We pay for excellence, I replied. The question is, are you excellent enough to work every day for someone you called an embarrassment this morning? The directness of the question made everyone at the table shift slightly. Natalie's face flushed, but she didn't look away. I was wrong, she said quietly. Obviously, I was very wrong about your situation. You were wrong about more than my situation. You were wrong about my potential, my intelligence, my work ethic, my character. The question is, what else might you be wrong about? She considered that for a long moment. I suppose I'd find out working here. You would. The question is, are you brave enough to find out? Natalie closed the folder and looked around the room one more time. When her gaze returned to mine, something had shifted underneath her expression. When would I start? Monday. If you accept. She extended her hand across the table. I accept. I shook her hand, noting that this time her grip was firm and steady. Welcome to Helix Innovations, Natalie. I think this is going to be a very educational experience. For both of us, she replied. And for the first time since she had walked into the room, her smile looked genuine. As the panel disbanded and Natalie went to complete her hiring paperwork with HR, Daniel lingered in the boardroom. That was either the most professional handling of a family conflict I have ever seen in my life, he said, or you are setting up an extremely elaborate piece of revenge theater. I gathered my notes, considering it. Maybe it's neither. Maybe it's just two sisters finally getting the chance to see each other clearly. If she can't handle working for the sister she underestimated, then she'll learn something valuable about herself. And if she can handle it. I paused, looking out at the skyline where the Helix logo crowned our building, visible from miles away in every direction. Then maybe we'll both learn something about family. 3 months later, I stood in the same boardroom watching Natalie present her Q3 strategy review to the full executive team. Her presentation was flawless, comprehensive, sharp, and creative in a way that surprised even me. The simulation data shows a clear pattern, she was saying, clicking through visualizations with quiet authority. Patient response to our Genesis pipeline candidates varies significantly not only by genetic profile, but by lifestyle factors that we haven't been integrating into the predictive layer. Recommendation? Sarah asked. We should expand the input model to include real-time biometric and lifestyle data, not just genomic data. I've drafted a pilot framework that could improve clinical concordance by an estimated 9 to 12%. The room buzzed with interested murmurs. It was exactly the kind of forward-thinking analysis that had built our reputation in the first place. Excellent work, Daniel said as Natalie concluded. I'd like to walk through implementation timelines with you next week. As the meeting ended and executives filed out, Natalie stayed behind to pack up her materials. We had not spoken privately since her first day, holding to strictly professional interactions during her ramp-up period. Strong presentation, I said, closing my laptop. Thank you. I've been learning a lot about the intersection of biology and machine learning. Learning from whom? I asked, echoing my question from her interview. This time her answer came without hesitation. From the smartest CEO I've ever worked for, who happens to be my sister. I studied her face, looking for any of the resentment or embarrassment that had defined her for years. Instead, I saw something I had never seen before. Genuine respect. Natalie, can I ask you something? Of course. What changed between the interview and now? What actually shifted for you? She considered the question carefully, organizing her thoughts with the same precision she brought to her work. I think, she said finally, I realized I had been measuring success by other people's standards instead of by actual outcomes. You built something extraordinary while I was busy judging you for not following the path I would have chosen. She paused, gathering her materials slowly. But more than that, I realized I had been so focused on protecting my own image that I never bothered to actually see you. The real you. And once I started paying attention, she gestured around the boardroom at the company I had built. Once I started paying attention, I realized I had been an idiot. You weren't an idiot, I said gently. You were operating on incomplete information. Information I never bothered to gather because I was too arrogant to think I might be wrong. We walked toward the elevator together, our heels falling in synchronized rhythm on the polished concrete floor. There's something else, Natalie said as we waited. I've been meaning to thank you. For what? For Eliza's tuition. I know it was you. I kept my expression neutral. I don't know what you're talking about. Adriana, I'm your chief of staff now. I review your personal expenses for tax separation. Lakeside Academy tuition payments for Eliza Cole, age 9, my daughter's full name. The elevator arrived and we stepped inside. In the confined space, the conversation felt suddenly more intimate. How long have you known? About the tuition? 2 weeks. About everything else you've been quietly doing for the family? About a month. Everything else? Dad's cardiac medication. The mortgage payments after the bypass. The anonymous donor who bought new equipment for Mom's elementary school library last year. Shall I keep going? I pressed the button for the executive floor, buying myself a few seconds to think. Why haven't you said anything? Because I've been trying to figure out how to apologize for 6 years of being completely wrong about who you are. The doors opened onto my floor, but neither of us moved. Natalie, you don't need to apologize for having incomplete information. You need to apologize for not caring enough to seek out complete information. You're right. And I am sorry. Not just for that morning, but for years of dismissing you. Years of making assumptions. Years of treating you like you were less than you are. I stepped out of the elevator and turned back to face her. Apology accepted. But Natalie, going forward, we need to be clear about something. What's that? I'm not just your sister anymore. I'm your boss. And I expect the same level of excellence from you that I expect from every member of my team. She smiled, the first completely unguarded smile I had seen from her in years. I wouldn't expect anything less. After all, I'm learning from the best. As the elevator doors closed and carried her back down to her floor, I stood in the hallway and reflected on the strange shape our relationship had taken. 3 months earlier, she had called me an embarrassment. Today, she had walked our executive team through innovative strategy with composure and confidence. But more importantly, today she had seen me clearly for the first time in years. Not as the family failure, but as someone who had built something real while staying true to her own definition of success. My phone buzzed with a text from her. Dinner Sunday. My treat. I want to hear the story of how you actually built all of this. I typed back, your treat on a chief of staff salary? Her response made me laugh out loud in the empty hallway. Fine. Your treat. But I'm buying the wine. Even I can afford that now. 6 months after Natalie's interview, Helix Innovations announced the launch of Genesis 2.0, our next-generation drug discovery platform, a system that we believed would reshape personalized medicine across multiple therapeutic areas. The announcement was made at a press event in our downtown headquarters, with Natalie presenting alongside me as the project's strategic co-lead. Watching her field questions from journalists and industry analysts, I marveled at the quiet transformation. The sister who had once been embarrassed by my unconventional path had become a passionate advocate for unconventional thinking. The key insight, she was telling a reporter from Nature Biotechnology, was recognizing that the human body isn't only a genetic system. It's a behavioral and environmental system as well. It required us to completely rethink the relationship between data, biology, and the human beings actually living the data. After the press conference, our parents appeared in the lobby, looking visibly bewildered by the press coverage swirling around their 2 daughters. We saw the news this morning, Mom said, hugging us both at once. Although I have to admit, we don't really understand what you've built here. What we've built, Natalie corrected gently, is a company that's changing how medicine reaches patients. And Adriana did most of the building while I was busy being obtuse. Dad looked around at the gleaming glass lobby, the digital displays cycling our brand work, the hundreds of employees moving briskly through the open atrium. This is really yours, Adriana. This is really mine, Dad. And Natalie works for you. Natalie works with me, I corrected. She's been promoted to Senior Vice President of Strategic Initiatives, effective last week. Natalie grinned. Best career move I ever made. Walking into that interview room. As we walked them through the executive floor, showing them the teams of computational biologists, data scientists, and clinical specialists who were turning our vision into therapy, I realized something fundamental had shifted in our family. Not just between Natalie and me, but in the way our parents saw both of us. You know, Mom said as we finished the tour, I owe both of you an apology. We always pushed Natalie to be the successful one and assumed Adriana was the one we needed to worry about. We never bothered to look at what either of you was actually doing. Success comes in many shapes, I said. It took all of us a while to understand that. That evening, as Natalie and I worked late on the next phase of the platform, she looked up from her laptop with a thoughtful expression. Can I tell you something? Of course. This morning at the press conference, when I was talking about reimagining the relationship between data, biology, and human beings, I realized I was also talking about us. I raised an eyebrow. How so? We spent years operating on incomplete data about each other, making assumptions based on surface observations instead of actually digging deeper into the patterns. And now, she looked at me directly. Now I understand that the sister I thought was directionless was actually building something extraordinary. And you understand that the sister you thought was shallow is actually capable of growth. I smiled, saved my work, and closed the laptop. So, what's our next hypothesis? Whether two sisters who finally see each other clearly can build something even better together than either of us could build alone. I like that hypothesis, I said, picking up my coat. Want to start testing it tomorrow? Actually, Natalie said, I think we started testing it 6 months ago. And the early results look very promising. As we walked out of the building together, passing under the Helix Innovations logo that had become synonymous with innovation in our industry, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought us here. Natalie had been right about one thing in her original assessment. This had been the most important interview of her life. Not because it launched her career, but because it forced her to confront her assumptions about success, about family, and about the dangers of judging people from across a kitchen counter. And for me, it had been the most important hiring decision I had ever made. Not because Natalie was uniquely qualified, although she was, but because it proved that sometimes the best way to change someone's mind about you isn't to argue with them or to prove them wrong. Sometimes the best way is simply to give them the opportunity to see who you really are. The city lights glittered below us as we walked toward our cars. Two sisters who had finally learned to see each other clearly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new platforms, new chances to test the hypothesis that the most powerful transformations happen when people are brave enough to question their own assumptions. But tonight, it was enough to know that the family disappointment had become the family success story and had brought her sister along for the journey.